Hello, friends. Welcome to the Big Talk. We have talked about the power of story on this show many times, and that by sharing your story, you can change and even save someone's life. Well, what about the storyteller? On this season, we are diving deep into how sharing our personal story can change and save our own life. I am super excited to welcome our featured guest today, the incredible Jimmy Nelson. Jimmy Hayes Nelson, aka Coach Jimmy, has been a high-performance business coach for over a decade. Jimmy's unique skill is helping his clients to seamlessly connect their personal stories to their products or service, creating a strong know, like, and trust factor. Using his 20-plus years of experience as a stage and film performer, he crafted his own personal story to create a seven-figure business, and now dedicates his life to helping professionals craft their own stories to attract and impact the lives of their ideal audiences. Jimmy truly believes everyone has a seven-figure story if it's well crafted. Tell a story, change the world. Jimmy, tell a story, change the world is so impactful. Take a minute to fill us in on anything I missed and tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, Tricia, thank you so much. And thank you for that great intro. And I truly do believe change this, tell a story, change the world. And I think that people can think, well, that's pretty deep, Jimmy. But, I think I believe this so much because all of this started in the first grade for me. And when I tell people that, they kind of go, wait, huh? Because I say that in the first grade, I was exposed to the biggest, I guess, addiction of my life. I guess that's what you call it, Tricia, because in the first grade, I grew up in West Texas. And our little elementary school in West Texas, we were doing the whole elementary school was doing a Christmas play. But my first grade class, we got picked to do a musical number. And the musical number was called Too Fat for the Chimney. And it was this magical story of how Santa Claus was not going to be able to get down the chimney to give gifts that year because he had gotten too fat for the chimney. And I was a rather rotund kid growing up. I was kind of the fat kid in class. And I just assumed, it's going to be me. I finally got my shot. I'm this little insecure fat kid from a broken home, but I'm like, dude, if somebody's going to play Santa Claus, it's going to be me. Nope. They picked my buddy, Justin Martin, who was the skinniest kid in class, wrapped him up in a bunch of pillows. They put him at the top of the stage with a bunch of my other friends. They did kind of a Jane Fonda number. And yours truly, I got put in these, this onesie feety pajamas with the silly stocking cap and the drop bottom. And they pushed my little, not so little, my big insecure self to the edge of the stage and asked me to sing the solo, Too Fat for the Chimney. But that's where everything changed, because the minute my mouth opened and I got a smile from an audience and a nod, and it was just the first time I had a positive emotional response from a peer group. And when I look back on this entire journey, it all started there, because that was the first time I felt at home. I felt like I knew my place. I wasn't torn between two parents that were fighting. I didn't feel awkward because I was heavy and didn't fit into the social structure. In that moment, I found my power, and I realized that's what started this entire journey of realizing each of us has an opportunity to do something, to share a story, to share a message, to get an emotional response from an audience. Like you just said, not that only can entertain, can change the world, but literally can save someone's life if we know how to do it well.
I love that your experience of stepping onto the stage and speaking your truth and having impact was while wearing a onesie.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? And God bless my grandmother, she's no longer with us, stayed up stitching that thing together, and it was red with the drop bottom and the silly little stocking cap. But it's not many people that say that the epiphany of their life happened when in feety pajamas.
Amazing, amazing. Jimmy, talk to our audience a little bit about your transformation from being someone who shares their story and who goes into film, television, and theater, and now who helps other people tell their story for impact. Let's talk about you first and then move into how you serve your audience.
Absolutely. And you're not going to be shocked. There's a story around it. And we were just talking right before we pushed record about my time in Manhattan, in New York City. There's a big gap there that sent me on this path of trying to figure out how do I want to use this gift? How do I want to know that I know what I'm supposed to do with my life? But sometimes what happens is we start making a list of the reasons we can't do that, right? Like for me, it was my size. It was not having the money to go get the training that I wanted to have. But eventually took control of my health and fitness. I dropped 100 pounds. I gained some confidence, and I moved to New York City to pursue that dream, to jump on those stages. And there was one morning that I was leaving my little apartment in Queens, jumping on the subway to go to Times Square. And it was 5:30 in the morning, and it was cold, and I'm from Texas, and none of those things were positive, being that early and being that cold. And I jumped into Times Square, and again, another silly outfit. I was doing promotions work. And so for your audience that doesn't know what that means, it's Brouk actors that we're doing any little odd job. We're doing coffee demonstrations. We're filling in at parties. And that morning, I got handed like a turn of the century newspaper newsboy outfit. If you ever saw the movie Newsies, basically given that outfit, was told to pass out chocolates to the oh so friendly New Yorkers at 5:30 in the morning. And Tricia, this is where everything switched. Because not only, it wasn't that people were rude to me, it was that when people don't even acknowledge that you're there. And I found myself looking up at all those amazing billboards in Times Square of the Broadway shows and the movies and the TV. And I was like, this is what it was supposed to be. And there was this still small voice that said, Jimmy, stop waiting for others to put you on their stages and start making your own stages. And that's where it started with me. And it was about the time, this was about 2007, 2008, when the beginning of social media started, when smartphones, and all of a sudden we're carrying, TV studios in our pockets. And I was very blessed to kind of have this realization at the beginning of this. And once I started making those stages for myself and stopped waiting for the gatekeepers to tell me whether or not I was talented enough, or, oh, your leading lady's 6'2" and you're only 5'9", sorry, we can't cast you in this role. And once I realized how to make my own stages and have that impact telling my story, the next logical thing was to start empowering other people that didn't have anything to do with that, with entertainment. People like my dad, who's been in real estate for 30 years. He's like, can you teach my agents to do what you've been doing on social media? Financial advisors, or, and now just, I've had such a blessing to work with so many different backgrounds and people in corporate America, or entrepreneurs, or nonprofits that have a message to get out, and really show them how that personal story tied in whatever their product and service is their number one marketing tool.
This story gave me goosebumps. I have walked past the Newsies in Times Square, and I know exactly who you're talking about. And I also align deeply with what you're saying about creating your own stages. I always say, and I'm still in New York working in film, television, and theater, and I always say, if I couldn't get through a door, I would just build my own.
Yeah.
And what's so powerful about you choosing to build your own stages is that you understand the urgency with which a story needs to be told. Absolutely. And if you're not being given a stage, you have to build your own. Would you share a little bit more about the courage that it takes for our audience, so that they understand the courage that it takes to build your own stage and why it's so important?
Tricia, I love the fact that you've told me kind of a little bit of your background, because this is where we're kindred spirits. And I feel like being a performer in New York City was the greatest prepping testing ground to be an entrepreneur. Because when I would go to 3, 4, 5 auditions in a day, and I would sit down with friends that were in corporate America and say, so how did your auditions go? And I was like, oh, I don't know. They said thank you, and thank you means, we'll see. And they're like, how do you do that every day? And what I didn't realize is I was really working a muscle that in the business world, in the entrepreneurial world, of hearing no, of trying to start that business, of just not being fazed, and knowing that a no to you, to your product, to your service, to your cause is not a no to you personally. It's just that we have to find a different way to get around it. How do we tell the story to get the person on the other side of the table? For you and I, at times, that's a casting director. For some people, that's that donor. For some people, it's that next prospect. And how do we tell the story for them, not to convince them, not even to manipulate them, but if I can tell a good story, I get you just as excited about my cause as I am, and then we're partners, right? I'm not dragging you into something. I'm not trying to talk you into something. And so there is that urgency that if I have 30 seconds with somebody, what's the version of the story? If I have 3 minutes, or God bless those of us that have keynote opportunities or stages like this on a podcast, then maybe we get 30, 45 minutes. And so I really do think it's important that regardless of what background somebody's in or what business they're in, they know that full story, but they know this is how I executed in a business meeting. Here's how I executed if I'm on the podcast. Here's where I get to do it if I'm across the table from somebody at Starbucks. But at the end of the day, leading with a story and getting an emotional response from somebody is so much more powerful than just leading with whatever your facts and figures and stats are.
I love what you're saying about the failures that we experience as performers going to auditions. And I say failures because the reality is we have more no's than we have yeses. And I've come to reframe no means not yet. So when I'm producing a speaking event and I've got speakers who are applying and I'm not choosing them, I make it clear that my no means not yet. Because A, you may not be ready. B, I may want you to take my stage next year because the theme is more appropriate. Or B, you're meant for someone else's stage. What's also amazing about what you're saying, and I want you to expand on it a little bit for our listeners, Jimmy, is that you understand your story as a product and you are clear on how to sell it to whom and when. This is extremely valuable because many of my speakers say I'm talking about the same thing all the time. Should I have 5, 6, 7 different topics? I'd love for you to expand on your point of view with that question, Jimmy.
Absolutely. And that's such a great, people that are speaking all the time, it's like, oh, do I need to have a new speech all the time? And I say, I have about 4 or 5 stories that I keep in my pocket, and I have the first grade Jimmy story. I have a weight loss story that, maybe another time I have more time to talk about that. And then obviously I have the Times Square story amongst others. And it's always knowing who my audience is and which story I can apply to it. But it's just a few. And because if I just have a few of those stories, I can master that story. And I can tweak it to who my audience is as well. And knowing who your audience is so very important in knowing what that story is. And a lot of times we don't think of the story because we can take a personal story. If somebody comes to me and says, Jimmy, you work with people and help them tell stories and you're a speaking coach, you're a keynote speaker, what does first grade have to do with that? I say nothing and everything. And so a lot of times when I'm working on the workshops that I work with or the clients that I work with, we talk about where we try to find, what's that personal story that they may not think ties in at all. Because what I end up doing is like, well, so what do you do for a living? And you keep asking why. Well, what led to that? What led to that? And then somewhere you do find that magical story that you're like, okay, maybe, in first grade, I didn't know this is what I was going to end up doing, but I can look back and see where the seed was planted. And one of the thing I wanted to add to that I love that you put up is us at, failures as performers or whatnot. I remember when I first got to New York City and I started going to a weekly scene study class, and I walked in and recognized people in the class. And I was like, oh, they're in a Broadway show. They're on a soap opera. And Tricia, what was this? I always feel bad saying this, but you know what the most encouraging thing was watching them struggle with the same stuff I did. And I think we as human beings think that people that are successful, never messed up and still don't struggle with anything. And when I saw people that I recognized from TV or on stage in Broadway struggling with the exact same things I was struggling with, whether it was memorizing a line or connecting to a piece of material, for me, it was extremely encouraging because I was like, oh, it's not that they're better than me. They've just had more reps. They've had more opportunity to have people tell them no. They just got the job first. And I think that that's applicable for everybody in business because it's so easy to look at a timeline. And I know we as actors do this. Oh, I've been in New York for 3 years and I found a buddy of mine got the big agent in 6 months. But that happens in business too. Hey, I started my online business and I've been grinding at this thing for a year and somebody else popped quick. Yeah, but who knows that the person that popped quick is also gone 3 months after then. And what you're building is something that lasted a decade, And so I just wanted to throw that in as well for someone who may be feeling a little discouraged right now because they're looking at somebody else's success and just thinking that everything they touch is gold, and that's just not the case.
I so love that you are bringing this to our attention, Jimmy, because talking about point of view and the mistake of falling into the comparison trap. So many speakers, so many artists, they forget that their point of view is unique and they try to be someone else.
Absolutely.
Or they try to compare themselves to someone else and then they get paralyzed, they get frozen, they stop moving forward. how would you share with our audience? And I talk about this all the time, point of view and comparison and the ego and all of that. How would you share with our listeners, encouraging your clients, your speakers, yourself to stay out of the comparison trap, to be conscious of your unique and powerful point of view in relation to telling a story?
Absolutely. In fact, I was working with a gentleman in one of our workshops not long ago, and he had a line, something, he's like, I want to be a good speaker. He goes like, I want to be a good speaker like somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk or Tony Robbins. And I paused and I'm like, I love both those gentlemen. I said, but I can also tell you 3 other speakers, dozens of other speakers who aren't super huge, or maybe not, use a lot of 4-letter words or whatever, and just as effective. And I said, the reason Gary and Tony are so great is because they're just them times 100. The reason you listen to Simon Sinek or Mel Robbins or Brene Brown, and they have a completely different energy and just as effective, because they figured out what was them. And it is so easy to go, oh, audiences relate to people that are super energetic, so I'm going to be that version. But audiences are more sophisticated now than ever, and you know it. When you're listening to somebody, you're like, that's not how you are around a dinner table. That's not how you are around your friends. Like, even if we don't recognize it, like, it's like you can smell it or feel it. You're like, something's off about this guy, or I don't believe what she's saying. And it's just the fact that we inherently are looking for authenticity. And so if it's going to be authentic, if you're authentically quiet and pointed and analytical with the way you deliver a message, then lean into that. I had people for a long time, Tricia, when I started moving into the keynote world, I get, wow, you're really theatrical. And I would have people try to back off my musical theater background, until, God bless, I had 2 amazing speaking coaches say, Jimmy, lean into that, because that's what's going to make you different. And like you just said, I may not be for that next event. They may like, this guy's kind of big. Like, all of a sudden he's trying to be like the Justin Timberlake of keynote speaking or something. And it's not right for this audience. But if I adjust to try to match what every meeting planner is gonna do, I may miss that exact stage that's looking for me. And I had a very dear musical theater coach in New York City who's no longer with us, and an older gentleman in his 80s, and we always called him the Yoda of musical theater. And I was such a young kid, and he said something I didn't realize and appreciate till later is, he said, Jimmy, go into those auditions and just be you. Quit trying to guess what the people on the other side of the table want. He's like, you may or may not get the job. He's like, but that opportunity, that huge opportunity that they're looking for just you, if you're trying to be different versions of different people, you're going to miss it. He's like, be willing to get the no's. Be willing to just practice being authentically you, because that's the one that's going to pay off, because you're going to find the right stage that needs exactly you, that's going to have the biggest impact. And it comes back from us being authentic to ourselves.
I love all of this so much. I'm just going to repeat that. Be willing to get the no's. That is so powerful and so, so important. Tell me what's going on right now in terms of your relationship to speaking and camera work. I know that we are all doing much more virtual performing, and that requires another style of technique and of awareness. How are you training your clients? How are you personally showing up differently? And I don't use the word pivot because it is innovate in my book. So
Right.
I'd love to know how you're innovating.
I love the opportunity, to be really honest, and maybe that's just the optimist in me, but it was, oh, look, we all get to learn a different way to communicate. And I just think whether you're a speaker or not, I feel like communication, we have never had more ways to communicate with each other as a species ever. And I feel like communication is a lost art form, right? Because we all want to hide behind a text or an email, and we don't want to interact with people. And God forbid we actually pick up the actual phone and use the phone part of the phone that we're on all the time. And I think this is such a cool opportunity, whether it's, I've moved all my, workshops and my stuff with my clients to Zoom meetings like this, but I get a chance to study facial expressions a little bit more. It's how do you use the camera? Sort of how do you fill the stage? How do I use getting really close, and how do I make eye contact right there and make them, even if I'm talking to a big webinar, make somebody feel like I'm speaking just to them. And these are opportunities via a camera that you probably aren't going to have on a stage in front of 20, 30 people or a couple hundred people or a few thousand people. The other really cool thing that I've really enjoyed doing is doing some of these virtual summits on stages where it's 13 screens and 3 cameras and it's Zoom meetings, right? And when you have the chat. And I was telling somebody the other day, I said, hey, they're almost more intimate than when I'm on a stage. And the reason it is if I have 3 screens of people from Zoom, I can see the chat and I can talk to Sally in Denver and go, good morning, Sally. I love your red sweater. What are your thoughts on XYZ? Where if she was in an auditorium of 2,000 people, number one, I don't know Sally's name, and I don't get that interaction. And I was like, there are some ways that as we've moved to these online summits, they've become more intimate and more interactive, and then your audience feels more a part of it. As you know, as opposed to if you're sitting in an auditorium, it's really easy just to sit back and be spoken at, or us as speakers just speak at people. And this, we get to co-create with our audience, and it makes them feel more involved.
I love all of this, Jimmy. And for everyone watching and listening, this is such valuable gold when you are thinking about taking a stage, when you are thinking about sharing your very important message. You must be willing to take risks, be courageous, willing to share personal stories. And I want you to go a little bit deeper for our audience, Jimmy, because this is all so fantastic, of why being the person who becomes vulnerable and intimate with the storytelling is going to reach the person they're meant to.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this question. The thing you are hiding right now, that the story you don't want to tell, is your power. It's right now we live in such a world where everybody wants to be polished and perfect. And think of your heroes. Think of your favorite movie. Your favorite movie is not the movie where you turn it on and in the first scene, the guy gets the girl and they happily ever after, and they have all the money in the car. You're like, in fact, you're like, I don't like that guy. Like, things are way too easy for that guy. Your favorite movie is the one where the breakup happens at the first, or the guy gets punched in the face, or somebody has to overcome something. And why is that? Because we want to root for our audience. The other part about being vulnerable, and I get it, because you're scared of being judged. But let's think about that just for a second. When is the last time somebody was vulnerable with you, shared something kind of embarrassing, kind of showed you their wounds, and you judged them? Like, honestly, think about that. The last time somebody's like, yeah, I really struggle with this, or this is something in my past I'm not proud of. You're like, God bless your heart. That's so courageous of you. Yet we assume if we do that, everybody's going to point and laugh and judge us, which just isn't the case. And in fact, when we're vulnerable and we share something we've struggled with, you have the opportunity to connect with somebody in your audience who thinks they're the only person that has ever felt that way ever. And if you have the power to somebody in your audience to go, oh, you too? I thought I was the only one. That person's going to be with you forever. You want to talk about a lifer, whether that's somebody for your cause or a customer or somebody to join your team or whatever that is. Once they understand you have similar wounds, that you can understand where they struggle, or you can understand where they've hurt, that person will be with you forever and ever. And that's what I mean about getting an emotional response from somebody, not just your facts and figures and stats in your resume.
Jimmy, we are absolutely kindred spirits. We speak the same language around the art form of speaking and storytelling. And clearly we have also shared a theater background and musical theater and all of that. Can you share with our listeners and our viewers your styles and techniques of pulling out that juicy, vulnerable, powerful story from the folks you work with?
Absolutely. So I feel like a lot of people think, well, I don't have a story, or they listen to mine. And there's certain parts of my story I don't even like to share anymore. When I tell somebody I lost 100 pounds, or any big part of a story, right, about getting out of debt or building a big business, because then what happens is people they admire you. Oh, that's awesome. Could never do that, right? Because you just built this big mountain for them. And so what I tell people is really the most powerful stories is the first step stories. It's if they're in weight loss, it's the first 5 pound stories. It's the first $50 they made online. It's the little story. Because what happens is somebody that's listening to you goes, oh, if they can do that, I can do that. Because that's what we want to do. We want to instill, I say this all the time, is like, I feel what I do in my world isn't as a speaking coach. I deliver hope to a world that desperately needs it.
Oh my
I
gosh.
help
Say that again. Say that again, please.
we as speakers, we're not speakers. You know, what we do is we deliver hope to a world that desperately needs it. And that's what you do when you choose to be vulnerable and share a personal story and tell somebody about where you've struggled. And then show somebody, and you don't even, when I say when you've overcome something, even if you're just a couple steps ahead of them. Was talking with a client that was starting a health and fitness online business, and they were like, Jimmy, they're like, I really don't feel like I can launch this thing yet because, you know, I don't have a huge weight loss story. I've only lost 30 pounds. And they started to drift off, and I was like, oh, time out. I said, what? They're like, well, I've only lost 30 pounds. I said, do you realize you are a rock star hero to somebody that's just been sitting on their couch thinking about changing their life? That if they could even imagine what their life looks like 30 pounds from now, that seems so far off. And you have an opportunity to be that person, to give them hope, to say, hey, I just took these steps. I just came out of that season of my life. I know where you are on the other side and how to get you through. You know, sometimes, you know, if the story gets too big, we get too far away from remembering how we felt at the beginning of it. So I feel like what people deem little stories, I don't feel like there's a little story, because it can have just as big of an impact when we choose to craft it the right way, put ourselves in our audience's shoes, be a little vulnerable, and then show them how you can take them along as well.
This is amazing. I want to go back to how you felt about when you first started, because I'm always talking about speakers. I want you to experience how you feel walking out onto the stage, how you feel when you receive the standing ovation. And there is something so important about how we feel at the beginning of a process, which transports us. Dig into that a little bit for me, Jimmy.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever gotten this, but, and I know people mean this like as such a compliment. When somebody says, wow, that just comes easy for you. Maybe they see you on stage, maybe they see me or a speaker, and they're like, oh, that just comes easy for you. And I know they mean it as a compliment. And I remind people of two things. Number one, my very first audition ever, when I was 100 pounds overweight and I was supposed to have a monologue memorized, I came on stage and I literally had a physical, like my body shook. I felt silly because I couldn't control myself. And now where somebody says that and I'm like, well, what was the transition? And I'm like, oh, there are thousands of hidden hours that people will never see. For me and you, maybe that was in a scene study class. Maybe that was in rehearsals. I remember when I first started my first business, I first got started in the network marketing world in health and fitness. And I was supposed to run these meetings in New York City. I would rent out a dance space on Tuesday nights and supposed to have a meeting. You're supposed to invite your friends and help them get started. And I would lug all my stuff there and put up a projector and nobody would show up, or my one buddy would show up. And you know what I'd do? I'd practice my talk. And people don't want to practice anymore. People think, okay, I got the story. This is it. Now I just want to be the rock star. But you have never seen all the times, probably me and Tricia, flub a line, mess something up, go up, a tech issue goes wrong, something. Oh my gosh, I've had co-stars fall off of stages before. Most recently, a year ago, when we were still doing live events, I had an MC gig, and they asked me spur of the moment, hey, can you run on stage real quick and do XYZ? Had a little story to tell, and and so this is the first time the audience doesn't know me from Adam. They've never met me before, and I get up there and I'm going to tell this little story and then do what the event planner had asked, and my mic goes out. And so from the audience, hey, your mic's out. So they bring me another mic and I kind of make a bit out of it. I run back off stage. The DJ followed me. He re-kicked on the music and I made a joke. I was like, hey, I don't know if you heard, but I go back into my story. Second mic, gone. By this point, I just feel like somebody's pulling my leg. Then they bring me like the mic that they pass around in the audience with, like, it's like a plush mic. That one goes out, Tricia. And so I had gotten far enough into my story that I had said something about having a theater background. So I just go into like full Shakespearean voice to the back of the house. And I'm like, can you guys hear me? And I finish my story and I introduce the next speaker like I'm supposed to. And I come off the stage and the event planner comes up and gives me the biggest hug. And she's like, I will put you on any stage anywhere. And I was like, why? She's like, because I really didn't think anything of it. And she's like, do you know how many people would have melted down in that moment? And I thought about it. Why didn't I? And I was like, oh, well, any improv training, right? It's yes and. We've had things go wrong on stage, and you just have to make it work, right? And so that's just a lot of way of saying it is that this theme of practice. I love the fact that you're telling, your audience, imagine the way that you're going to feel on stage, that standing ovation. But somewhere along the way, you have to fall in love with the process more than performance. And I did as an actor, I did in my fitness journey of where we're showing up and grinding before we ever get the applause, before we ever get the pat on the back. If you want the public recognition, you got to be willing to show up in private every day.
I love that. And we call that in my community doing the plies and doing the bicep curls.
I love that. That's great. And you're so right. Yeah. Nobody's watching your bar exercise, your tedious bar exercise, or the little tiny bicep curls, but they see all these little choices every day. And think about it this way. If you're waiting until that person calls or asks you to speak, when opportunity knocks, it is too late to prepare. Yeah. You start preparing now. For what, don't get ready, stay ready. Because what if you're not ready? What if that once in a lifetime opportunity pops up and you haven't been doing your due diligence? You're going to kick yourself the rest of your life. And I understand it's hard. It's hard to have the urgency to prepare before we have to. That's where the discipline comes in. That's what makes you the 1%. That's what makes you different than everybody else. And that's why you're going to succeed when that opportunity pops up. Because when nobody's around, when it'd be easy to hit the snooze, when it's easy to sleep in, when it's easy to not practice, when it's easy not to work or reach out to the event planners or all those little things, you're showing up anyway. And that's where you're going to be rewarded for it as well. When that opportunity pops up, you're like, yep, I'm ready. I'm ready to go because I stay ready. I don't get ready.
We share the exact same philosophy. It's incredible. And if you want to move from good to great, you have to be comfortable living in the fact that it's hard. It's always going to be hard because you're always in process.
Absolutely. You just have to, you end up learn, and it sounds so cliche, you just have to learn to what it feels like outside of that comfort zone at all times, that teeter, that uneasy feeling all the time that you're just like, okay, after a while. And maybe that's because that was every audition. I don't know if those of us with our background, you're walking into a room with strangers that you don't know what you're going to be thrown at any moment. And I don't care how often you've ever auditioned, there's still butterflies. There's that little moment right before you jumped on this screen with me that I'm like, do I know what I'm doing? Am I going to be good? Okay. A million times, but also that means we care. Like if I didn't care, I wouldn't be nervous. So, for those people maybe that are struggling with, I feel nervous in this, it's because it's important to you. And because it's important to you is why you need to show up before the record light ever comes on or the stage pops up or anything else as well. Because the only way we get better, we get rid of some of those nerves. They're never going to go away. The fear never totally goes away. So embrace that. But repetition is the mother of, mastering any skill.
Jimmy, what are you working on right now? What can our viewers be getting excited about that you're working on?
I've been doing a lot of these online workshops and being able to help people that way. And, the thing I'm most proud of is I've literally put together a checklist, just a free checklist that hopefully your audience can check out. That's helping people put stories together. It's a little bit of a memory jogger because what happens is we don't think our stories are important. And so I take people through, okay, tell me about your worst date. Tell me about your first car. Tell me about, and these stories, they're like, Jimmy, I'm a financial advisor. This has nothing to do. I'm like, trust the process. Sometimes I feel a little bit like Mr. Miyagi, right? Where I'm like, I don't want to paint the fence. I want to do like the karate moves. I'm like, come paint the fence with me for a second. We're going to get to the crane kick. I just need you to paint the fence. But they can get that checklist at storywellcrafted.com and hopefully start that process of discovering how many stories they really do have that can impact other people's lives.
Well, I want to thank you, Jimmy, for being a featured guest today on The Big Talk, and we will put all of this in the show notes. Is there anywhere else our listeners can get in touch with you?
Everywhere on social media, I'm the Coach Jimmy. Please reach out. I answer all my own DMs. That's really me chit-chatting back and forth. So if there's something that resonated with you that you heard, I would love to hear that because that lets me know that what I'm doing is making a difference. Or if you have any questions, please holler. And Tricia, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share my story and talk to your audience today as well.
It's my absolute pleasure. I hope that you will start sharing your powerful story today, and be sure to subscribe and click on that notification bell so that you get access to my newest and latest videos. And I really appreciate that you are here and will always respond to the comments. Big love.